Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for inviting me to this conference. This is my fifth country in 5 days. I've just come back from Asia. I was in Japan, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, and in Singapore. So I believe one of the key global challenges for all of us is jet lag. This institute fulfills a very important role in bringing together leaders from different sectors and backgrounds to discuss the issues of the day. The theme of this conference is ambitious, but nevertheless pertinent for the world today. My subject is one aspect of the global challenge, the energy challenge. Let me start with a piece of good news. One of the targets set back in 2000 for 2015 under the UN's Millennium Development Goals is currently on track to be achieved. Indeed, it is the very first target. In 3 years' time, it is expected that the number of people living on less than $1 a day will be halved. This is a major step and one that reflects the improving living standards in many emerging markets. While access to energy is not solely responsible for this progress, I would suggest it is a factor. Energy brings heat, light, and mobility. It brings refrigeration for medicines. It brings infrastructure for schools and hospitals. It brings the means to irrigate farmland and indeed to travel to work or indeed travel to a conference. Providing that resource is what we do. But here is a more challenging point. By our estimates, the world will need as much as 40% more energy in 2030. And almost all that extra demand, 95% of it, will indeed be in the emerging economies. That, in a nutshell, is the biggest challenge. Simply being able to find and produce energy on such a scale, both affordably and sustainably. Looking to sustainability, I mentioned earlier that energy consumption is now growing more slowly than GDP. It now takes less energy to create each new unit of wealth. However, greenhouse gas emissions are proving harder to separate from energy growth. In other words, the carbon emitted per unit of energy consumed is only slowly coming down. In searching for solutions, one way of looking at this is the same drivers which reduce energy intensity can also reduce carbon intensity. In other words, competition driving innovation, capability, and efficiency. It requires directing the competition to the right target. Put simply, if you want the market to find a lower carbon solution, then you have to adjust to the market conditions. For example, by putting a price on carbon, which we agree with, or raising the returns from low carbon energy until it becomes competitive without support, which again, we advocate. This is generally more efficient than command and control regulation. Turning to the role of companies, like many of you in this room, we've thought long and hard about how we can deliver genuine, real, and tangible value to our investors. We firmly believe that the way to approach that task is by making choices and playing to one's strengths. A super major cannot be super at everything. In BP's case, our strengths are in exploration, deep water production, giant fields, gas supply chains, and a world-class downstream business, including biofuels. In fact, we've been investing in alternative energy to the tune of around $1 to $1.5 billion every year for the past many years, underpinned, of course, by technology and relationships. And by making choices, we deepen our capability in those areas, we find new partners, and we strengthen, most importantly, our capacity and ability to innovate. Energy is a complex issue, and sitting in this magnificent auditorium, I cannot resist drawing a parallel with the process of creating and performing an orchestral piece. There are many different elements, and each needs to be positioned as part of an effective mix. Getting that mix right is very important. Each instrument has to have the right tone, and the blend has to be carefully weighted. And before anything can happen, the capacity to innovate has to be invoked and applied. So to summarize, we at BP believe that the world is going to need more energy, driven primarily by the emerging economies. But the mix of energy is shifting. Efficiency is increasing, energy intensity is improving. The challenges are those of safe and reliable operations, security of supply, and sustainable growth. The major drivers that can help us overcome the challenges are technology, capability, relationships, and efficiency. For companies, the imperative is to make choices and to play to one's strengths. And if there's one thought to put before policymakers, it is to encourage the capacity to innovate through open markets, competition, and well-targeted and well-articulated policy frameworks.
Governance is also about how to handle crisis. As you mentioned it briefly in your presentation, let's just go back to 2010. I think it's fair to say that BP's reputation was in tatters at that time after this very big accident in the Gulf, the biggest oil leak ever. How do you handle this? Or let's say, just start. What does this mean to your company?
It was an extraordinarily difficult period, and I want to start by remembering that 11 people died in the operations in Macondo, in Deepwater Horizon. And when people go to work, they should expect to go back to their families every evening. And that, I think, is a fundamental right every person should have when they work for a company. It is a tragic accident, and it was a very difficult time for the company. Clearly, what we took as a decision very early on was to not stand behind lawyers, not to stand behind contracts, but to make sure that we would do all we could to restore the Gulf. Now, you will remember that on your TV screen, BP was very visible at the time. The reality of our industry is that we have many risk-sharing partners. In fact, we had no employees of BP on that rig. They were employees of contractor firms. We also had risk-sharing partners, equity partners in that venture. But we took a decision early on that ultimately the character of an organization, the character of an individual really comes through in wartime, not in peacetime. Yeah, my colleague from Credit Suisse, I'm sure, would agree that being a bull market trader is easy. Being a bear market trader is a lot harder. So we took a decision very early on that we would actually do what it takes to restore the Gulf, and we would deal with other elements later. That was a challenging task, quite frankly. I used to be at that point the global treasurer of BP and the chief executive globally of BP Finance. We were burning $1 billion a fortnight. That's a lot of zeros. Markets were concerned. But I really do believe that in the fullness of time, what will be, I think, recognized is what we did. You know, we wish the situation did not occur. We absolutely wish it did not occur. But when bad things happen, how you deal with the bad things, I think says something about you, and it does actually say something about your role in society.